Okay, continuing with Algebra 2, 6-3. We're on problem 4. Now we're multiplying binomial and radical expressions. What is the product of each radical expression? Well, I see a binomial times a binomial. So don't forget what we have to do. We have to FOIL, which is first, outside, inside, last. First is first term of each binomial. Multiply them together. So it's going to be a 4 times 5. And then outside is going to be like the first term and the last term, the outside terms. So 4 times 4, radical 2. So there we go. And inside are our two inside terms. So next we're going to go 2 radical 2 times 5. And there it is. And our last term is the last of each binomial. 2 radical 2 times 4 radical 2. Right there. Okay, so once we get those down, then clean it up. So 4 times 5 is 20. This becomes 16 radical 2. This becomes 10 radical 2. And this becomes 16. Okay, now combine all your like terms. 16 plus 20 is 36. And then combine these radical 2's. 16 plus 10 is 26 radical 2. So there's your answer, 36 plus 26 radical 2. Our next problem is now with a minus sign. Binomials with minus signs. So again, we're just going to do the FOIL process, paying attention to our negative sign. So start by writing your equation, and let's start the FOIL process. Get yellow now. All right, so the first one, move this up. We're going to do the first, so 3 times 5. Outside, 3 times radical 7. Inside is negative radical 7 times 5. And then last is negative radical 7 times radical 7. So there it all is. And now clean it up. So we have 3 times 5 is 15. And then we've got this minus, it's going to be a 5 radical 7. So 3 minus 5 radical 7 is negative 2 radical 7. And then last, you've got minus those squared becomes radical 49, which is just 7. So it's a negative 7. Okay, so now combine your like terms. And you have 15 minus 7, which is 8, minus 2 radical 7. And that's our answer. It's that simple. Now I've got it, but I would like for you to work problems 8 and 9 in your workbook. And I'll come back with the answer for the got it. Pause this video now. Okay, so now I'm back, and you should have finished problems 8 and 9 in your workbook, which were very easy. And if you worked the got it, here it is, worked out. And the answer was 46 plus 16 radical 5. I want to state that conjugates are expressions. We worked on these in Algebra 1. It's like radical A plus radical B and radical A minus radical B. They only differ in the signs of the second terms. Everything else is the same except the signs in the middle. So when A and B are rational numbers, the product of two radical conjugates is a rational number. So let's look at how this works. So here we go, multiplying conjugates. What is the product of 5 minus radical 7 times 5 plus radical 7? So the first thing we're going to do is write our problem and then start our FOIL process. So we're going to have 5 times 5. First, outside is 5 times radical 7. Inside is 5 times negative radical 7, which is negative 5 radical 7. And then last, we're going to have a negative radical 7 times a positive radical 7, which comes out to a negative radical 7 squared. So now, when you simplify everything, you end up with 25 minus 7. I know some of my students are going to wonder, how did that happen? Well, you've got 5 times 5 is 25. And notice that you had 5 radical 7 minus 5 radical 7. Your middle two terms cancel each other out to 0. And then radical 7 squared is just 7. So you've got your minus 7. So 25 minus 7. Now, when you calculate that, 25 minus 7 is 18. So remember, we did these in Algebra 1. Okay, here's our got it. We've got 2 of them here. You're welcome to work these. And I would like for my students in their workbook to work number 11, 12, and 13 in their workbooks. So pause now. I wanted to point out that just like in Algebra 1, when you multiply conjugates, it's always going to come out to a squared minus b squared. So let's look at how that works here. My a is 5 and my b is radical 7. So 5 squared minus radical 7 squared. 5 squared is 25 minus radical 7 squared is just 7. 25 minus 7 is 18. Okay, so that should help your work go much quicker. So again, pause, do your work. Okay, so here we go. The first one we have here is my a is 6, my b is radical 12. So it's going to be 6 squared minus radical 12 squared, which becomes 36 minus 12, which is 24. And over here, a is 3, b is radical 8. So it's going to be 3 squared minus radical 8 squared. So it's going to be 9 minus 8, which is 1. So those were super easy. It shouldn't have taken you but 1 or 2 minutes to do all 3 problems. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so sometimes a denominator is a sum or a difference that involve radicals, and if the radical expressions are square roots, you can rationalize them by multiplying the numerator and denominator by the conjugate. So let's look at what that looks like. It says, how can you write the expression with a rationalized denominator? So there's your clue, as it tells you you're going to have a rationalized denominator. So we have 3 times radical 2 over radical 5 minus radical 2. So the first thing you need to do is write it, and let's look at what we have. So we're going to start off with what we have, and now let's multiply it by the conjugate of that denominator. So over here we had 5 minus radical 2, so the conjugate of that would be 5 plus radical 2, right? And that would get rid of all those square roots underneath on that denominator. So when we do that, we know there's just going to be a squared minus b squared, okay? And then they're just distributing here, my 3 radical 2 times the top of my conjugate there. And then we get that distributed, and then radical 5 squared is 5 minus radical 2 squared is 2, so it gives us 5 minus 2, which is 3. And then they simplify our numerator, and it comes out to 3 times radical 10 plus 2. And notice that the 3's will cancel out here. And I end up with radical 10 plus 2. Okay, here's our got it's. Okay, and here is the answer quickly scrolling down to the first got it. It's